Hello, this is Sarah with Yoga for Classrooms, and I am coming to you today to debunk a myth that we hear sometimes. And that myth is that when teachers first start implementing mindful moments in the classroom, sometimes they think it means being completely quiet. So sometimes I work with educators who are starting mindful moments in their classroom. They're really excited to give this a shot. And then they say, it doesn't work because my student wasn't perfectly silent while participating in the mindful moment. So I want to talk about what our expectations should be when it comes to silence or how quiet our students should be during mindfulness. So I know the thought you have in your mind when you think of yoga and mindfulness, right? You think of everyone sitting perfectly still, eyes closed, maybe some fancy little posture, and the classroom completely silent, right? But that's not reality. We know there's going to be a student who giggles or someone who falls over a little bit from being off balance in one of our balancing poses, or a pencil drops on the floor, or a student whispers to a friend, that sort of thing. I don't want you to think it didn't work if that happens in your classroom. That happens in many classrooms. So here's the truth. Mindfulness is not about creating a perfectly quiet classroom. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. Mindfulness is not about creating a perfectly quiet classroom. What mindful moments are all about is awareness. Awareness can happen in silence, but it can also happen, with movement and with laughter and with conversation and sometimes even a little bit of chaos. That's okay too, right? So let's talk about what mindfulness really is. At its core, mindfulness is about paying attention. Right? The definition we often use for mindfulness is paying attention in the present moment with curiosity and without judgment, just noticing what's happening both inside our body and outside of our body. So, when we talk about teaching mindfulness to our young people, we're talking about helping them notice, helping them pay attention to what they're feeling, what they need, what could help them in the moment, what could help center them. So, that can be that mindful breath. It can be stretching our bodies in some sort of yoga activity. It could be just listening to sounds around them, being more grounded in the moment. Sometimes it's just walking across the classroom with more intention and attention, right? So, um, noticing our emotions, we talk about that a lot with yoga for classrooms, just noticing how we're feeling, knowing there are no good or bad emotions, but noticing them is the important part of mindfulness. We started yoga for classrooms. Yoga for classrooms exists because too many young people didn't have those tools to notice how they were feeling and then respond, in reaction to how they were feeling to help themselves feel a different way if they needed it or to continue feeling that way if they wanted. So back to our myth. The goal is not silence. The goal is awareness. Okay. The goal is not silence. The goal is increased awareness, increased attention, increased understanding, and paying attention to what's happening. The other thing I want to emphasize is classrooms are not yoga studios. We don't think they should be at Yoga for Classrooms, okay? We don't expect you to roll out yoga mats. We don't expect you to be, professional yogis. That is not what we want or what we expect at Yoga for Classrooms. We are all about bringing mindful moments into real classrooms, into actual classrooms. I've been a school counselor for a long time. I know what real classrooms look like. And that's what we want to integrate mindful moments into your real classroom. So you're not going to have a perfectly silent atmosphere like a yoga studio. We have students that have different energy levels and different needs and different ways of learning. And that is not the same as a yoga studio, right? So we don't expect that. We expect our classrooms to be real and be with real students, but we still believe we can bring mindful moments to those real classrooms. Okay. We can help students notice how they feel. We can help students build self-awareness. We can help students be more mindful, even if it's not a perfectly silent Zen yoga studio in our classroom. The other thing I want to emphasize is that yoga for classrooms, we talk about mindful moments. You hear us say that phrase all the time because we're not talking about really long periods of time. Again, that's not realistic in the classroom setting or in the school setting. So we're not asking students to sit quietly and focus for, a 45-minute session, anything like that. At Yoga for Classrooms, our mindful moments are brief and they're meant to be so that we can just insert them into our day during a transition when we come back from lunch or recess to start our day during morning meeting, those sorts of things. So, again, we're not trying to create that perfectly silent atmosphere before we begin. We're just trying to give that moment to really look inward, to be more mindful, to increase that mindfulness through those short yet really sweet and really effective mindful moments. So, that is the key there, not expecting 45 minutes, of a session. The other thing is we have to expect some imperfection, right? At Yoga for Classrooms, we never say that there's never going to be a laugh or a wiggle or a distracted student or, that sort of thing. Those opportunities and those experiences make this all real. And I think that noticing that's fine. I've done so many mindful moments where I came back at the end and said, "Okay, class, what do we think just happened?" Because, maybe we were distracted or really loud or not participating fully. And I'll say, "What did you notice happened during that mindful moment?" And you'll hear some really amazing things from students. I remember one time, a student telling me that during we were doing an imagination vacation, which is one of our guided visualizations, and a student said, "I really noticed, Miss Kirk, that my mind was wandering during that." And that is mindfulness. They noticed that, right? So that's okay. That's awareness. If we are seeing that there's too much energy in the room for the mindful moment that we're trying to implement, that's a sign that we need to maybe do a different type of mindful moment. At Yoga for Classrooms, we talk about intentionalities. There are mindful moments that help decrease energy, and there are those that help increase energy depending on what we need, and that's all about that awareness we want to teach students. So I've had times where I led a mindful moment and then I realized, uh-oh, that didn't meet the need. Let's scratch that and start over. And that's okay. That's modeling for our students that we just need to, pay attention, see what's going on, be more aware, and then that's how we can respond, effectively and in a way that's going to really impact the situation. So, if a mind wanders, if a student is feeling tense, if a student notices during the mindful moment that they're feeling nervous or, all those different things, all of those are awareness. That's what we want to happen. The definition of mindfulness is not about eliminating experiencing experiences. It's about noticing them. And we teach our young people that. So, um, like I said, don't expect that perfectly quiet room, but do expect, these mindful moments to help our students have that shift in perspective. Like I said, ask those curious questions at the end. Get them to start thinking about what happened, even if it wasn't silent or even if it wasn't perfect. That's not what mindfulness is about. We want to teach our students that this is a tool we have, doesn't always have to be used perfectly, but give ourselves permission to experience whatever we're experiencing, but to be more aware of it, to pay more attention to it, and to respond in what our body and our mind is telling us that it needs. So, thank you for everything you do to help your students become more aware of themselves and their thoughts and their feelings and their experiences and all of that. That is what Yoga for Classrooms is all about, and we so appreciate you bringing mindful moments to your classrooms, even if they're not perfect, even if they're not silent. That's okay. What you're doing is supporting your students' well-being, and that is what we are so appreciative for. So, with that, we will see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this video. Bye bye.